Welcome everyone to the Global AMR R&D Hub's interview series, AMR Snapshots. I am Usha Lamichani, a Scientific Program Officer at the Global AMR R&D Hub, and today we are delighted to be speaking with Dame Sally Davies, who is a leading figure in the global health and one of the most influential advocates against the ever-increasing antimicrobial resistance crisis. She has been the Chief Medical Officer for England and Chief Medical Advisor to the UK government from 2011 to 2019. She's currently the UK's Special Envoy on Antimicrobial Resistance, Master of Trinity College, Cambridge, and a member of the Global Leaders Group on Antimicrobial Resistance. Among several other things, she continues to support. Welcome to the AMR Snapshots, and thank you very much for taking out the time to join us today, Dame Sally.
You're welcome. It's good to see you, Usha.
Today, we have 5 burning questions that we'd like to ask you. And my first question to you, Dame Sally, is, given the leading role that you have in global health and AMR advocacy, how did it all start and what drew your attention, particularly to antimicrobial resistance?
Thank you. So I was brought up believing that as humanity, we really ought to use our time on this planet to do the best we can for other members of humanity. I think my father, now long dead, who inducted this feeling of values and the need to contribute in me, would now talk not just about humanity, but about the planet much more broadly. So I worked very hard to try and give back to society as I saw it, both as a doctor working in poor parts of London, and then playing out my role first as Director General for Research and then as Chief Medical Officer. And I never set out to work on antimicrobial resistance, but it seemed to me in 2013, when I did my first statutory independent annual report as a Chief Medical Officer, that here was a massive problem that was getting worse year on year, no solutions to hand, in the sense that we already by then had an empty pipeline of new drugs, and people were not focusing on it. The experts were not managing to get cut through, I think the expression is, get people to listen and to do something about it. And I just thought that this couldn't go on, that we had to take action and sort it out. I didn't realize how difficult, how slow, and what a path it would be. But we are in the middle of a silent and invidious pandemic, and it's important that all of us do our best to mitigate this.
Now I'd like to ask you about something you touched upon, about how to communicate effectively about the massive scale of this global health challenge. So the AMR reviews, which you were a big part of, predicted that 10 million deaths would be attributable to AMR only by 2050. However, the Lancet paper on global burden of AMR shows that 1.27 million deaths were attributable to AMR and about 5 million already associated to AMR in 2019 alone. I would like to quote your statement on social media again, that the silent pandemic is not silent anymore, because we have the evidence now that the numbers are rising at an alarming rate. How do we make people understand that this is a real and present danger, and those routine operations and infections could turn fatal? And how do we turn up the volume on this silent pandemic? And what role does effective communication and outreach play in conveying the critical nature of AMR?
Thank you. Well, I think you've got to the nub of the problem. It's complex biology and it's complex science, but we have yet to really engage the politicians as they are on climate or COVID. And I think that that's because it is such a complex picture that it's much more difficult to explain. And so I try and deal with it in small bits. The other problem is that there is no real patient face of this. If you look at the progress we made on HIV, the progress on TB, less so, but all the same, malaria, there has been a patient face. there have been patients, families, and the community demanding of the politicians action, making sure their stories and the system deficiencies are in the public eye. And we don't really have that. Antimicrobial resistance, AMR doesn't do it. Superbugs get some people involved, but actually, of course, it is more than just the superbugs. It is about resistance of fungi, resistance of viruses, parasites, all infectious organisms that can cause illness, pathology, can become resistant to treatments. And so it is so broad that we haven't found a way to engage and communicate effectively. I think as the numbers go up, people begin to understand it a bit. But my own profession, the medical profession, the nursing profession, the clinical professionals are also at fault. Do we say to a woman, your mother died of AMR? No, we say your mother died of a difficult to treat infection or untreatable infection. So we don't bring it into the families, into the community in that way. People have looked at this, experts have. In Britain, the Wellcome Trust commissioned some work, the Framing Institute has done work, and they all tell us we haven't got it right and make suggestions which sound really good. But the trouble is, we're halfway there. And if you stop and turn the story back to the beginning, we will lose that half we've already explained and got action on. And so this is a really complex difficulty. And you said it yourself, we are losing modern medicine. That data you've quoted that was in the Lancet that we actually funded and made happen is terrifically important. 1 in 5 of those deaths are of children under the age of 5. Some new data showing massive numbers of infants dying of untreatable and untreated sepsis. So it really is a big problem to engage, to communicate, and we need to bring in the younger generations. So I'm delighted that you're now championing it. How do we get your generation and even younger involved and active on this?
The One Health approach has been heralded as a global solution to the problem of AMR and other major health challenges. But we have to recognize, as you said, the complexity of the AMR problem, and that it requires mobilization of multiple actors from different sectors. The Global AMR R&D Hub's dynamic dashboard is providing a source of information on AMR across all One Health sectors, that is human, animal, plants, and environment. But currently we see limited funding being invested into projects that encompass multiple sectors, or maybe it is that there is lack of actual cross-sectoral research and One Health projects being funded currently. How can we improve this as we go forward and ensure that required global responses can be mobilized to incorporate the perspectives that are necessary across the whole continuum of research and development to implementation and action? Is enough being done, or are we still moving in silos?
Well, you're right, not enough is done and we move in silos. But let's think about this One Health. It scares a lot of people. And what we need the world to understand is AMR as it matters to them, and not get sunk in what does One Health mean? What do I need to do differently? So of course, infections can be disease specific. Some infections infect plants, others fish, others bats or deer or humans. Why are we interested in One Health? Because they can either directly move between species, or they can share the antimicrobial resistance genes between different types of bug in our guts, in our microbiomes of mammals, or in water or something. So there is transmission across. What we don't know enough about is how much transition, what makes for transmission, and what would get in the way, apart from, of course, cleanliness and hygiene, which takes you back to good clean water and sanitation. But most of the time, what we really need people to do is address their own species and their own problems. And actually, if you're doing surveillance, you can use one lab to do animals, plants, agriculture, water, or you can use different labs. But then if you use different labs, it's important to look at it by species or zone, whether it's environment or animal, but then to look at how the crossover matters. And I think if we make it too complicated, people get stuck in, oh, how does the crossover work, and don't do enough on their own area where we need them to. So I think we need to kind of debunk the One Health, as I would say, use it because transmission and crossover matters, but not let it get in the way of people doing their jobs where they are well and effectively.
I would like to believe that the formation of recent quadripartite really does signal the new era for One Health collaboration. And in the context of bringing together multiple actors and global leaders to work together, I'd like to move on to the next question, which is regarding the G7. And you have been working with the G7 to ensure that leaders commit to act now to tackle AMR. And last year, under the UK presidency, the G7 finance ministers agreed upon a statement of actions to support antibiotic development. The G7 member states also agreed upon continued commitment to solve the challenges facing the development of and access to the most needed existing and new antibiotics. On the same topic, the WHO and the Hub were called upon to prepare a progress report in 2022, which we are working on right now. And how can we keep this momentum going on as we move further into 2022, the German presidency, and so on in the future?
Thank you. Well, I think that where we need new science, the whole world has a role to play, but actually the rich nations are where there really is a critical mass of scientists making new vaccines, making new drugs and new diagnostics. So it's terribly important that we find ways to recruit the G7 countries, their scientific communities, and their funding to this fight against antimicrobial resistance. And what we do know is that most companies are not keen and have withdrawn from making new treatments, new antibiotics, because of the market failure. And the commitment of the finance ministers for all the G7 countries to try pull mechanisms. As you will know, England has just announced the results of its pilot, and I hope we're going to go on and do many more because it showed how successful the pull mechanism can be. But it is by piloting, by learning, by working together, and that critical mass, politically, financially, and scientifically working together, that we can move things forward. And so it's terribly important, and I'm delighted that the G7 finance ministers under the Germans' presidency will continue the finance track, and we're already talking to the Japanese about how they can pick this up and develop it. It's very, very important.
Thank you, Dame Sally. You've been actively working towards keeping AMR high on the agenda of the G7 discussion or global leaders, and we are able to capitalize on that momentum created by your efforts to keep AMR on the agenda for global leaders. So thank you for that. And talking about global leaders, you are a member of the Global Leaders Group on Antimicrobial Resistance, which was formed to strengthen global political momentum and leadership on AMR. In the beginning of this year, GLG have published a rolling action plan with clear priorities, indicators, and activities. So what are your hopes for this group and what it can achieve? And will GLG help give AMR the voice it needs?
I hope GLG really contributes to the voice AMR needs. We need more than the GLG though, but the role of advocacy is important. And it's important also to understand GLG has no formal governance that stays with the quadripartite, nor does it have a big budget to do things. But with the host of people on it from different countries, both prime ministers and ministers, technical people, the director of the Koch Institute is there from Germany, Professor Lothar Wheeler, and it is just impressive who is there, all of us trying to improve things. At the moment, I'm leading a subgroup discussing what we believe as a global leaders group AMR needs out of the discussions on a pandemic treaty or instrument that the WHO has an international negotiation group leading on. So it's all working forwards in the different areas of the quadripartite, pushing, reminding, advocating, and thinking through our asks. But it's a big task and a long way to go. I pray we get there.
I certainly hope so as well. And collaboration and working together is definitely key to solving this problem of AMR. Dame Sally, you have been a champion and the face of the fight against AMR. And on behalf of the Global AMR R&D Hub, it was an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to interview you today. Thank you for sharing your experiences, insights, and vision for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for working with us and for everyone who listens.
Thank you very much.